join us for the first time for them to know what the Nigerian Prize for Leadership is all about. Thereafter, we'll head to the first lead discussion.
NPL is an intervention by some eminent Nigerians to chart the course of a new leadership identity and culture in Nigeria, as well as use the paradigm to raise a credible successor generation of leaders for the nation on a sustainable basis. Unlike other efforts, the NPL comes with a prize money offered to support the winner's future leadership activities, including mentoring of young leaders through the NPL Protégé Leadership Program. NPL mission is to institute and project a truly Nigerian leadership prize that will inspire Nigerians to lead a life larger than self for community, nation, and humanity. It is envisaged to be the highest, most reliable, and prestigious single leadership prize in Nigeria. It targets Nigerians of all ages who have shown credible, exemplary, remarkable, and sustainable success, prowess, creativity, and skills in their various endeavors through compelling personal, corporate, and social values. The Nigerian Prize for Leadership is to identify what leadership means to Nigerians, benchmark what should represent the image of a good or bad leader in Nigeria, determine what responsibility leadership confers on both the leader and the follower, establish a new culture of leadership for Nigeria, and ascertain how this paradigm can be made to take center stage in energizing governance in Nigeria. The NPL Ambassador Fellowship and Protégé Leadership Programs are a deliberate and well-coordinated initiative to groom and raise a replacement generation of Nigerian leaders based on the right values, mindset, and character. The International Leadership Clinic and Exhibition is a forum to bring together outstanding leaders from within and outside Nigeria to share ideas on successful leadership principles, practice, trends, and innovations towards entrenching excellence in leadership at both national and global levels. As part of efforts to rebuild citizens' trust and promote consciousness for excellence in leadership, the Governing Board of Nigerian Prize for Leadership, under the leadership of Professor Anya O. Anya in 2020, inaugurated the National Leadership Dialogue Series, NLDS. The 2020 series, which held monthly from May to November 2020, was deeply impactful, ideas-driven, and solution-oriented, with participation cutting across generations. It has Rethinking Leadership as its generic focus, while each edition had a target focus. The second edition of the National Leadership Dialogue Series holds on the 29th of every month from May to November 2021. The Nigerian Prize for Leadership is a private sector-driven initiative that operates with a governing board. The board comprises 15 eminent Nigerians with robust integrity, sound pedigree, and wide experience in various dimensions of leadership. Their selection is based on individual distinction and merit. NPO works with partners comprising corporate and non-corporate organizations, as well as credible individuals, burdened about the need to promote the culture of excellence in leadership and raise credible successor generation of leaders. We pray that you would see the need to partner with the Nigerian Prize for Leadership in this endeavor.
Thank you very much. Thank you, technical team. It's now my pleasure to introduce a distinguished Nigerian, a fellow of the Chartered Institute of Bankers, an economist, a seasoned banker, a legal practitioner, a consummate administrator, an accomplished bureaucrat who modeled exemplary and credibility in his election as Senator of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, representing Katsina Central Constituency of Katsina State in the 6th Senate of the Federal Republic. Senator Ada served as Director General, Secretary, National Revenue Mobilization, Allocation and Fiscal Commission. He served as Permanent Secretary, Economic Affairs at the Presidency, Permanent Secretary, Ministry of National Planning, and Permanent Secretary, Ministry of Defense. Before then, he served as Director Domestic or Home Finance, as well as Director foreign exchange and trade relations of the country. Senator Eda midwifed the formation of Petroleum Trust Fund in Nigeria. It is important to note that distinguished Senator Eda has also served as Commissioner of Finance, Katsina State, Chairman, Defense Industry Corporation of Nigeria, Pioneer Board Member, Nigeria Economic Summit Group, Member, Board of Directors, Nigeria Deposit Insurance Corporation, Member, Board of Directors, National Maritime Authority, now NIMASA, Board Member, Bureau for Public Enterprises, Sole Administrator, Continental Merchant Bank Limited, Secretary, Okibo Panel on the Reform and Restructuring of Central Bank of Nigeria. Distinguished guests, on Thursday, July 15th, 2021, Senator Ibrahim Eda was inaugurated as the Pro-Chancellor and Chairman of the Governing Council of Usmanu Danfodio University, Sokoto. Senator Eda is awarded the honor of Commander of the Order of the Niger. He is the Sardanan President and a member of the state, Katsina State Emirate Council. It is now my honor and privilege to invite the distinguished senator to speak to us on the topic of today, rethinking or reworking the economy from process to funding. Budgeting for whom? Distinguished Senator Eda, you have the floor, sir. You have the virtual lectern to speak to Nigeria and the global community who are linked to this by virtual means. Thank you very much, sir. Please unmute yourself, sir. Unmute yourself.
Benjamin. Am I through now?
Yes, you are through now, sir.
Mr. Chairman and Chairman of MPL, the Secretary of MPL, who is also the orator of this, my fellow panelists or speakers, distinguished ladies. First of all, I am very happy to be here, and also to touch base with all friends with whom I have not really had contact for a very long time. Ben is one of them, and I'm happy that Ben, the head of the Office of the Budget, is here, because this topic can be broken into two aspects: the process of budgeting and the process of funding the budget. And while I will take the first aspect, the process, I'm sure Ben will do justice. Mr. Chairman, first of all, I have listened to what Adakole, my good friend, has done. And I have to say that while the figures are factual, a lot of what he says as his conclusions are his own opinion.
So thank you very much. You are most welcome once again.
See, because really the situation is not as gloomy as he tries to portray at the conclusion of his. But I think that is something we'll talk about. Mr. Chairman, as I said, the topic is working the economy from process to funding, budgeting for whom. Now there are critical terms of what's in the theme: reworking, economy, process, funding, budget. I think we need to understand the context with which it is being referred to in this particular topic. First of all, when we talk about economy, people anywhere tend to think that it is something, it is a thing, which in reality it is definitely not. An economy simply means a careful management of resources to make them go as far as possible in the provision of goods and services for the lives and the livelihoods of people. That is the context to which the term economy means whenever it is referred to really a country or an organization. Now, an economy is reworked after it has gone into a recession or a downturn. I'm sure we'll talk a lot about that, time allowing. Now, as I have said, Mr. Chairman, a budget has been defined. I'm happy that Adakole mentioned the three types of budget, because a budget is no more than an estimate of revenue and expenditure over a particular year which the budget covers. That is, we have to understand it from that context. An organization draws up a budget, a government draws up a budget. Now, in Nigeria, when we talk of a budget, we usually mean the federal budget, quite forgetting that the federal budget only covers 52 point something of the actual inflow, the financial inflow into the federation account, or the main body from which funds are got for goods and services and for activities. And two, we also tend to downplay the fact that a budget is composed of not only the actual funds that are dispensed in the process, but more importantly, and this is what we should really appreciate, a budget also comes along with certain policy tools that are used for the management of an economy. And here, referring to fiscal on the one side and monetary policies on the other two. So aside from the budget, we look at a budget not so much for the money that is going to be dispensed or spent, but also for the other accompanying policy thrusts that will now impact a lot on the economy. Mr. Chairman, the budget in Nigeria is determined by a constitutional provision. The process, that is. The process is determined by the provision of Section 81 of the Constitution of the Federal Republic of Nigeria as amended, which specifically provides that the President shall cause to be prepared and laid the House of the National Assembly of the estimates of revenues and expenditure of the Federation for the next financial year. It is important for us to appreciate this, because what it is saying is that the President does not, and I repeat, does not present the budget. He presents a profile of estimate, projection of what the country expects to have in the inflow, as well as what it will apply the available funds for. Now, before then, there would have been some consultations, and then was at the center of most of these things, wherein dialogue held, discussions are held with certain aspects of the National Assembly to agree on certain fundamentals. This includes the expectation of how many barrels of oil are coming, the exchange rate, and some other, the debt profile in general terms, not in specific terms. Now, it is on that premise that the President asked the Ministry of Finance to coordinate, and by Ministry of Finance, obviously, Ben is at the center of it, wherein the various ministries prepare the proposals which really come and they are coordinated. Now, when they are coordinated, it is those ones that the President lays before the National Assembly. Now, it is important. People make the mistake of thinking that the National Assembly is simply a thoroughfare where these things come and they must go as they come. No, that is really not the situation. You see, they have what they call the power of control over the public funds. So really, they are expected to scrutinize, approve, reject, but not on their own, but rather after consultation, so that a general agreement. Because the expectation is that being the representatives of the people should have a say, and in fact, a very big say in the determination of how the funds are dispersed. Now, the process starts from the moment the president lays down before the two chambers, sitting jointly, this particular.
Give me time, let me finish with listening to this. I'll soon finish.
So now, as soon as the president lays this down, each house, get it very clearly, each house have the same powers and undergo the same process. Each house goes with a copy of that, and first of all, subject it to what we call the first reading. The first reading of any bill is simply to acknowledge that it has been laid before the National Assembly, and in particular, that particular chamber. And at the first reading, all that happens is that the title of the bill, after all, and I still want to emphasize, up to that point in time, it is simply a bill, not a budget. No. The title of the bill is read. When it is read, it is then passed on for internal process. The second aspect of the process comes through what we call the second reading. The second reading is when it is laid properly before the chamber, and discussions are held. Now, take note, these discussions are purely on the policy thrust and the general outline of the bill, not specifics. Nobody up that point in time discusses what really the budget contains in terms of figures. No, only the policy thrust. Now, it is after the second reading that it is referred to the committee, usually the appropriation committee. It is the appropriation committee then that now gives the various segments to the respective committees to which each segment relates. And then it is these committees that now undertake what would ordinarily have been a public hearing. And that comes by way of inviting or reaching out to the respective ministries or departments, wherein they come and defend their respective provisions. Now, after that,
somebody Ida, Senator Ida.
Yes. Sorry. So it is after that the whole thing is compiled again, coordinated by the appropriation committee, and then it is brought back to the House for the Senate for the third reading. It is at the third reading that point by point, item by item is free to be discussed. After that discussion, there is a general agreement. This discussion, what has been presented may be accepted as is or as is amended. Now, once that one is passed, that particular chamber has come to its own decision as to what it accepts to be a budget for that particular financial year. Now, as I have said previously, each chamber will do exactly at the same thing. So there are bound to be differences. So each chamber then raises a committee, what they call a reconciliation committee. And these reconciliation committees meet to iron out differences, so that at the end of the meeting of these two, the reconciliation committee, joint reconciliation committee, a single agreement will be reached, which will be referred to each house. Now, when it goes to the house, no discussions are allowed. Each house considers what is laid before it by the reconciliation committee, and then it is accepted or rejected. If it is rejected, no discussion. The reconciliation committee will go back and then discuss and ultimately come up with a single It is that document that is now referred to the legal draftsman, who now prepare it into a bill. Up to that point in time, it is a bill. It goes to the executive for assent. As soon as it is assented to by the head of the executive, it becomes an act. That is what is really referred to as the Appropriation Act, and to which will be attached the details of all that had been done in terms of agreeing with specifics. Now, those details are attached to the bill that is referred to the executive, and as soon as the assent is procured, it becomes the Appropriation Act, which is referred to the Ministry of Finance or the executive for implementation. And it is from that point that the issue of funding it comes in. And that is where people like Ben will now come to play with the paraphernalia in the Ministry of Finance. Now, this is really the process. The funding is determined by really what happens in reality, simply because I have said earlier, it is an estimate. Now, that estimate is simply a projection. It is not absolutely necessary or that what has been projected will come to reality. Whatever has been projected may be exceeded, or there may be a shortfall, depending on the circumstances that happen in reality. Now, this is really the how the process is undertaken from the time the estimates are done. Now, there are certain salient issues, there are certain myths and misconceptions that I think I should mention in determining or explaining the process. One, people expect that whatever the executive brings will simply pass. It can't happen that way. Why? Because in the process of discussion between the executive and the legislature, sometimes findings are made. Certain aspects of the projection, especially of revenues, are reviewed. And it is found out that more revenue is expected or would be expected than what the executive has really said. That gives a gap. It is that gap that is used for new projects. A lot of what is called a constituency project usually come from that source, because once you have an excess of revenue over the projected expenditure, you are bound, because a budget must always balance. That is where the issue of new projects coming into the budget. Projects different from what the executive would have provided or placed in the first place. Now, the second myth is the fact that it is the legislature that really goes on to do or execute the projects. That is not true. You see, it is the projects are agreed to between the legislature and the executive. And usually, the legislature only makes suggestions and provisions on the basis of the respective priorities. It is the executive that will later now, because ultimately they are the ones that will be responsible for execution. So as soon as there is an agreement and that the excess funds, excess input, have been clearly disbursed into projects, then the implementation, the funding and the implementation goes to the executive exclusively. It is the decision that will now determine how to find the funds to budget, or rather to finance the budget. And that is really what goes. From the perspective of the process, that is where it ends. Beginning from the executive, coming into the legislature doing its work, and then it now goes back to the executive, where the specifics of implementation, sourcing of funding. Now, having said that, I would also like to comment briefly Earlier on, the Adakoli mentioned about the three types of budgets: a balanced budget, a deficit budget, and a surplus budget. Now, the difference is very, very important because each has its implication in the conduct and the management of an economy. Each one has effects. Each one is determined by circumstances. A balanced budget is determined by the docility of the thinking that, look, it doesn't need to really spend more than it can generate, in which case it means no growth, no new projects. Where it is a surplus budget, the executive feels or believes that no, it has less need than the resources it has, thereby it creates a surplus, and this surplus is usually applied either towards paying off on an already existing debt, or it is salted away as a surplus to be referred to and used in the future. Where there is a deficit budgeting, it means that the expected revenue is not sufficient enough to cover the projected expenditure. And here things come into play. This is where the issue of debt incurrence comes in, because that a budget must always balance. Therefore, that particular deficit has to be financed either through grants, if we can get other bodies good enough to give us free money or to give us money free of charge, or you borrow. And that is really where debt creation comes in. And I should say that, as the executive has been saying over and over again, debt creation or borrowing per se is not bad, so long as the purpose for which it is being applied is regenerative enough to ensure that by the time you come to amortize, pay off the loan, you have already generated the resources. Problems are created where you continue borrowing and you either misapply the funds or you use it for purposes that are not regenerative, so that by the time it becomes due, you have no means of, you have not built up reserves to pay it off. Thereby, you have to borrow up and put yourself in more debts. The second issue that I also, for the little time I have remaining, is to explain, as was said earlier. You see, a budget itself is made up of two components. On the one hand, you have the policy thrust that comes, and then in terms of fiscal policy means the process by which you generate the funds through taxation, especially. And here, you raise your taxes if you want to get more money, but that does not really necessarily mean so. Sometimes you get more money if you lower the taxes, because by lowering a tax, you bring more taxable parties into the bracket, and the collection becomes easier because people are more amenable to paying taxes that they don't even notice they are paying. Or, as I said, you can impose duties, which is part of fiscal process, in order to protect your economy by ensuring that imported goods cost more, and therefore you discourage import, and they encourage the internal production process to really produce those goods, so that in the end, the fiscal means, is used to protect your economy. Now, when we go to the monetary policy, and then the fiscal policy is exclusively by the Ministry of Finance, by the government. And this is where you have the national planning, and at one time, they were all in the same, when we were in the system, they are all in the same umbrella, in the same room, so we have no problem. Now, when you get to the monetary aspect, you are now requiring the control of money supply. And you do that by the manipulation of interest, the reserves you force banks to keep, quantity of money. And by then, there'll be funds available for the productive sector to borrow, invest, expand, produce, meet internal demands, export, so that in the end, you now have an economy that is active. So to conclude, reworking an economy means that an economy that has reached a down, now evolving policies from really the quantum of money you spend to the type of policies you now introduce in such a way that at the end you reflate the economy, provide incentives for industries to borrow, produce more, substitute for your imports, export to gain foreign exchange, thereby strengthening your economy. And in the process, generating employment, improving the standard and condition of lives of your people, and having a peaceful environment for your people to be satisfied, to be peaceful, to be fully employed or substantially employed, so that you do not leave idle minds for social vices such as crimes and insurgency that we now have. I believe that at the second time, I will be able to go into specifics on how really an economy can be reworked. With this, I say thank you very much, and I yield the floor to the next speaker. I thank you very much.
Thank you very much, distinguished Senator. You have really shown us that you have gone around the entire finance sector. You've been a commissioner of finance. You have been a director at the Ministry of Finance. You have been part of CBN. You have been part of the banking sector, commercial banking sector. So you have gone through the entire circle of financing. And then you came to the Senate and you became part of the budgeting system at the Senate. So it's not surprising that you have taken us through a comprehensive tour of the process in budgeting. Now we are going to the budget master of the Federation. Hear from him what seems to be missing from what the senator has told us, although it is assumed, is how do we get Nigerian people involved in the process? I know that because it goes to the National Assembly at the end of the day, and the National Assembly are the representatives of the people, that is taken. But is there any other way that we have a feedback through a direct mechanism to know how involved or how engaged the ordinary Nigerians are in the budgeting process? Do we have a way of taking feedback from the man on the street, from those in schools, and so on? So it's now my pleasure to invite Mr. Ben Ifani Akabweze, a distinguished banker, an accountant, an economist, and an administrator. He is a fellow of the Institute of Chartered Accountants of Nigeria, fellow Institute of Credit Administrators, and an honorary member, Chartered Institute of Bankers. Mr. Akabweze has, over the last 23 years or more, been involved in direct financial and budgeting systems. He has consulted in banking. He has been in the public financial management. He has worked with a number of organizations and so on and so forth, cutting across different parts of the country. He has worked with Pricewaterhouse. He rose to the peak position of managing director, CEO of Now Merchant Bank. And then he became an honorable commissioner for economic planning and budget in Lagos State from 2007 to 2015. More importantly, Mr. Akabweze is a pastor with the Redeemed Christian Church of God. Ladies and gentlemen, join me to welcome the special advisor to the President of Planning from 2016 was appointed. Later that he became the Budget Office Federation, a position occupies us to welcome the man at the Budget Master Federation, Akabweze. You have.
Thank you very much. Because I have very little time, I have a lot to say. I'll be very light. You can't hear me because I'm not.
You can hear.
I will, even though I'm sitting down, crave your indulgence to stand on existing protocols. And
thank you.
Thank the organizers, and in particular, distinguished Professor Anya, for privilege of this invitation. I also have distinguished Senator Ida to thank for having done an excellent job of taking you through the process of budget formulation. And so I can then just speak more directly to the issues that I think, thankfully a forum like this, will enable us all get a better understanding about. I also, by the way, thank Dakole Ijogi for his for his detailed presentation, and a lot of my comments will focus on that. First, I agree with him that the budget is all of those things he said, a legal, financial, political, social, and economic instrument. I just would like to add that the budget is also a moral instrument. A budget is, a moral document, because when you look at the budget of any nation, you can tell by looking at the budget what and who that nation values. And that is why a budget is also, considered in modern, thinking around this subject to also be a moral, document or instrument. Let me then go on and to say that despite the great detail in Mr. Jogi's presentation, they were actually not as factual as they sounded, because in some cases they're based on incomplete or numbers taken out of context. The first key thing to note here is that Nigeria does not have a national budget. What he reviewed is the budget of the federal government of Nigeria. And he compared it with national budgets of some of those countries who don't have the same kind of, political structure as Nigeria has, like South Africa and Egypt, for example. So those what compared are not comparable, because it's not like for like. The Nigerian Federation, has three tiers: the federal, the state, and the local government. And each of these tiers of government is guaranteed, constitutionally guaranteed a share of revenue, and also has, constitutionally guaranteed taxing authorities. And so, in addition to their share of federation revenues, they also have powers to, levy and collect taxes and other, revenues. Under the Constitution grants the Revenue and Fiscal Commission the right to, develop the revenue sharing formula, which the current one we have gives the federal government 52.68% of federal collected revenues. But, in the Constitution or other legislation also, and indeed in that formula, there's 4.18%, an aggregate of 4.18%, which includes natural resource fund, ecological fund, and whatever, aggregating to 4.18. So what we actually then, end up with is 48.5% of federation revenues. It is 48.5% of federation revenues that you see reflected in the budget of the federal government that Mr. Jogi, reviewed. And so, for instance, when he says that Nigeria's budget is 6.4% of GDP, that's not actually correct. The federal government of Nigeria's budget is 6.4% of GDP. The number for Nigeria that is comparable to the number for some of the other countries that he used is 12%, which is what is called the public expenditure ratio for Nigeria, the aggregate of what these 3 tiers of government spend as a percentage of GDP. Nevertheless, that number is a very lowly number. Indeed, the African average for public expenditure ratio to GDP is 22%, and we are the lowly 12% at the bottom, near the bottom. Okay, a country like Morocco exceeds 40%. So, of a truth, the Nigerian budget is very low relative to our size and our, developmental challenges. But why is the Nigerian budget very low? The Nigerian budget is not intentionally low, and if the host will allow me, I would like to share just about 3 slides, and so we can see this. The Nigerian budget is too low. Our public expenditure ratio is too low because our revenue, the public revenues, are also too low. Our revenue to GDP ratio, and I'm not talking about tax to GDP because that's even a lower ratio. For Nigeria, and that's the aggregate of all the tiers of government, is 8%.
If you can now share your screen.
Thank you. Okay. This slide, okay, this slide, basically shows what I am talking about. If you look towards the left side of this slide, okay, let me make it bigger. Doing slide, okay. Look at the left side of my screen. See Nigeria towards the bottom there. That's our revenue to GDP ratio. And I'm not talking about federal government, I'm talking about all of government. See Algeria at 33%. You see the African average at 20%. Why is Nigeria's public, revenue to GDP ratio so low? It's partly because of the structure of our economy. We have over 20% of GDP, close to 25% from agriculture. The structure of our agri sector is largely smallholder farmers, not large-scale commercial agriculture, as you will find in South Africa, for instance. And therefore, these people, even though they contribute significantly to GDP, contribute next to nothing in terms of public revenues, in terms of taxation. Okay? The other big slice of our GDP, if you take the service sector in aggregate, is over 50%. But large sections of that are largely artisanal. And even sectors like the hotel, apart from a few big international in hotels, most of the others that you see, for instance, when it comes to tax compliance, are very low in that. So our revenue to GDP ratio, you see us there competing with Sudan. This is a problem. And so for people who worry about government borrowing, if government were to try to spend only what it generates and not borrow, the truth is we will be in a deeper problem. However, the point is, we must worry about the sustainability of our borrowings. And the reality is we cannot continue at the pace that we have been. Unfortunately, it's not as easy to pull revenues up. And since 2016, we've been trying to do so, but with 2 recessions in between, it's made it more difficult because a recession is not a time when you raise taxes or use new taxes and whatever. So if you look at the right side of this screen, you'll see that we're targeting to move Nigeria's revenue to GDP ratio from 8% to 15%. About double. You can imagine how much, just doubling. But at 15%, we will still be below the African average of 20%. But that will, significantly change, our capacity to spend, because, to the extent that you can then rate more, even your capacity to borrow, to leverage, increases. So I thought I'll spend time on this and explain what, so we can understand what this is. When, just speaking more, whatever, to some of the issues that Mr. Ijogi addressed, which is, I'd like to talk about the sectoral, allocation, the sectoral distribution. And just in case someone wonders, okay, so if you put your finger on this, it's a revenue problem that we have, it's a revenue challenge. What are you doing about it? We've launched what we call the Strategic Revenue Growth Initiative, and the 4 pillars around the independent, showing up our independent revenue, monitoring and driving that. These are revenues. Remember, apart from federation revenues, each tier of government can generate its own, revenues. And so, a key source of independent revenues for the federal government is revenues generated by what we call is government-owned enterprises, the parastatals and other similar agencies. The federal government over the years has invested about 40 trillion naira cumulatively in these enterprises. And at the budget level, all we try to target even is just a 2% return on the investment. For those of you in the private sector, I don't think any shareholder who will accept a 2% return on investment. But this has not been happening. But we have insisted that that is a minimum that we can sing. And so sometimes we've been accused of unrealistic budgeting because of the the gap between actual and the budget. But we've insisted that the budget is also a management tool to drive performance. So because historical performance has been poor, is no reason to then budget for low whatever. And with respect to the revenues from the GOEs, our persistence over the last 5 years is now paying out. Up until 5 years ago, the maximum in a year that these agencies have remitted was 200 and something billion naira. We've persisted. Last year they remitted 400 and something naira. This year, as of May this year, we've already collected over 400 billion naira, more than we've collected from the whole of last year from these agencies, because we've persisted and refused to accept their historical low revenue performance as a reason to budget low. So you see the other pillars, plugging fiscal drainers, which will include dealing with the next issue of certain subsidies, which as well as we're now looking at our tax expenditures. Tax expenditure is the term for all of these waivers, concessions, and whatever, many of which are established by law, but which we're saying no, we now need to closely re-examine their policy effectiveness because they erode revenues. For 2020, our estimate of tax expenditure was an aggregate of 5.8 trillion naira, more than the revenues, the aggregate revenues the government collected. And so we're keeping these under whatever. The Fiscal Responsibility Act provided for this to be placed before payment as part of the fiscal policy paper, strategy paper annually. It was never done until last year that we've started to deal with it and address and focus on this. So if it needs to review the laws to drop some of these sessions or waivers or whatever this thing, so we can do so. We need to also address things like the petrol, the PMS subsidy, the power subsidy. These are all things that erode our revenues. We need to leverage technology and automation to whatever for the e-customs or the single window project. If concluded, is expected to increase the efficiency, the collective efficiency of the customs by at least 50%. But for well over a decade, Nigeria has been struggling with just trying to get this done. Other countries have gotten it done. So these are the things we all, as the policy analysts, those looking at the budgets, everybody has been falling into the trap of just looking at how much we're spending and attacking the real issue, the real fiscal issue for Nigeria, which is how we can show up our revenues. In terms of the sectoral budgetary allocations that Mr. Ijogi showed, I think that those numbers those numbers are not complete. So, for instance, if you take education, the number of education does not include the figure for TED fund. TED fund, is dedicated appropriation annually for investments in infrastructure of tertiary institutions. But beyond that also is to say that when you take what the federal government is allocating to the social sectors of health and education and equate them to Nigeria's spend on those sectors, you will reach a wrong conclusion. First of all, by the constitutional arrangement, the subnational governments, the state and local governments are required to allocate a higher proportion of their resources to those social sectors while the federal government deals with things like defense, security, foreign affairs, and stuff like that, those the subnational governments don't have to deal with. And these are all part of also why, recurrent spending is high. The bulk of spending to run the missions is recurrent, and it's a necessary expenditure of government. If you look at the budgets of, even sectors like defense and, education and they necessarily, the bulk of that, it's largely, recurrent. What else did I want to talk about? Then when you look at, again, the breakdown in terms of the percentage up until 2015, the country actually, 2016, the country had no policy with respect to, minimum, there's no law, it's not mandated by law, nor by policy, it wasn't. And even now, it's still not a policy mandated by any law. But if you take Ethiopia, Ethiopia has a law that mandates that 60% of their budget be allocated to capital expenditure. And that's the law. So what it means is current expenditure will be kept under the 40%. If it means in any particular year that they cut salaries, they will do so. But they have a political arrangement that enables them achieve, stuff like that. In our own case, we have no law. We came up with a policy with effect from 2017, to say minimum 30% of the federal government's budget to be allocated to capital, expenditure. And we have, over these past years, generally, achieved, that or come very close to that. So when you look at the breakdown of the budget by, capital, recurrent, and whatever that is, you will notice that it didn't add up to 100%. That's because you left out the service-wide votes. And those service-wide votes also include some elements of capital expenditure. But what you presented was just what we call the NLDS capital expenditure. So for completeness, you will need to capture, that. So in conclusion, what we have, to deal with, as I said, we must address the revenue, challenge. And on the slide here, I have some of what we're doing to try to deal with that. But the other thing, and if recall when the Senator Ida, explained the budget process, the role of the National Assembly, the respective roles of the National Assembly and the executive in this budget process. Oftentimes, the executive is simply held to account for the budget, whereas, in reality, what we have at the end of the day is a budget as by the National Assembly. Because the current constitutional provisions defining these roles are very vague. And what has happened in practice is that the National Assembly has interpreted the constitutional provision as expansively as possible to give it the right to do anything it pleases with the budget. The budget says, gives them the right of appropriation. We will need, at some point in time, I believe, to get the Supreme Court to actually interpret what appropriation means. Since 1999, the budget has been a recurring source of, difficulty between the executive and the legislature. It got to a head during the late President Yar'Adua's regime. He decided to go to the Supreme Court and ask for an interpretation. But his party prevailed on him. That, it was the same party, both the National Assembly and Executive, for them to work it out, out of court. And so it's taken out of court, but till today, we still haven't resolved this issue. And so while we believe that, this budget, answering now the question of who is this budget for, the federal government's budget has not delivered as much for the Nigerian citizens as it ought to. And that's a fair comment that but part of it is because of this vague constitutional arrangement. Today we have a federal government budget that includes annually close to 20,000 projects spread across all the nooks and crannies of the country, because every legislator insists on bringing projects from his constituencies spread across the country into the budget. And through the process of appropriation, the National Assembly members are now belaboring the federal government with matters that are the constitutional responsibilities of state and local governments, and making it impossible for the federal government to concentrate on its own responsibilities and deliver on them. So, for instance, if I take roads, there's about 200,000 kilometers of road network in Nigeria. Only 35,000 kilometers of that is federal road. And so, if the federal government's budget was left to focus, the budget for road construction, to focus on just these 35,000 kilometers of roads, which are mostly the trunk roads linking the states and taking us to key industrial or agricultural, whatever, we will have a better federal road network. But if that budget for the road, the provision for road, is decapitated to try and fix all of the 200,000 kilometers of roads, because the states and the local governments won't deal with their own portion, then you're not going to have, you'll have neither good federal roads, nor good state roads, nor good local government roads. And the projects will remain, perpetually, in progress. And so you have roads in the budget that have been in the budget for 15 years and more. Every year is just a little more. By the time you get to one end, finish one end, the one where you started has gone bad or whatever. So these are real issues that we must, deal with. As to public participation in the budget process, the Fiscal Responsibility Act 2007 requires that we consult the budget. The Fiscal Responsibility Act says the budget, you have to prepare a medium-term expenditure framework and fiscal strategy paper. In the process of doing that, you are required to consult with the public. This MTEF FSP, you're required to then present to the National Assembly, which the National Assembly approves, and it represents the basis for the budget. So the MTEF sets out a top-down estimate of revenues and major expenditure headings and whatever, and the limits and things and whatever, and for those, and that's what then guides the budget preparation. We normally hold public consultations on this. Before COVID-19, we used to try and do it in Abuja and Lagos. Last year with COVID-19, we could only do it virtually. But the interesting thing was that the virtual one for last year, for the 2021 budget, and meanwhile, the medium-term expenditure framework is prepared on a 3-year rolling basis. So last year, we have prepared 2021 to 23. Then this year now, the one we have recently laid before the National Assembly is 2022 to 24. So you have 2 years intersecting, but it's on a 3-year rolling, basis. But our current constitution requires only an annual budget, even though you do a year rolling, MTEF. In that process, I was saying for last year when we did it virtually, we had well over 1,000, 1,300, people connected online, Nigerians from all across, the world. So this year we did it on a combined virtual and physical basis. We had the members of the media coming physically, and others are required to connect virtually. And I think going forward, even when COVID allows us to be able to do this on a distributed basis physically, we will have to continue the virtual option to give more Nigerians the opportunity to participate. And then after the budget, when the budget is prepared and before we present to the National Assembly, we still come back and consult, see a public consultation. After the budget is approved by the National Assembly and signed by the President, we still come back to the public to explain the details of this budget, what to expect and that. But the level of consultation where people expect the man in the village to sit down and be discussing what the budget will deliver from them, I'm afraid may not happen with the federal government's budget. Perhaps the state and the local government budget. So the federal government budget, the level of consultation, it's public, but in practical reality, you're going to then have to see what you see. Those who participate keenly are CSOs who represent different interest areas, your professional associations, and whoever else is interested. But that sort of consultation with people in their communities and whatever for the federal budget, that input comes through the input of the consultation with the National Assembly members who represent the constituencies. Thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you very much, Mr. Akabeze. You have indeed shown us that you are the budget master of the Federation. You have taken all the dimensions, and we sincerely appreciate you for this. We will now go to the next person. But before then, I would like to comment on a few things that you have said, sir, which I consider very profound, very, very profound. For the first time, I heard that budgeting is a moral, or budget is a moral instrument, and therefore budgeting is a moral process. That's very, very profound. Many of us have come to appreciate through what has happened this evening that budgeting doesn't just happen. It goes through a process. And we want to again thank you. We allowed you enough time to land effectively, but we'll have to find a way to get back our time so that we don't overrun the runway or overshoot the runway. Thank you very much, sir. Budgeting is a moral issue. If we see it like that, then it means that there is conscience attached to every issue of morality. And that's very, very important. The next speaker is from the private sector. As a matter of fact, a civil society activist in his own right, a lawyer, successful lawyer indeed. He specializes in development law, including electricity reforms, fiscal governance, human rights, and constitutional reforms. He was called to bar in 1988. He has worked on electric power sector reforms, privatization, gender and trade policy, and liberalization of education. He has tremendous experience in the area of public expenditure management reforms involving fiscal and legal issues and economic governance. The assignments undertaken by this gentleman include fiscal responsibility, procurement and audit reforms, budget analysis. He has also worked on economic and social rights, including the rights to education, rights to health, rights to housing, and rights to social security. He has led debates on the constitutional reform, the reform process, on the minimum core obligations of the state in economic and social rights and fiscal challenges in a federal system. This gentleman has also worked on economic policy and legal issues for poverty reduction in the National Economic Empowerment and Development Strategy, State Economic Empowerment and Development Strategy, and the Local Economic Empowerment and Development Strategy. That means he has worked on this document across the three tiers of structure of governance in Nigeria, political and economic. He has authored over 25 publications and over 300 media articles. He writes a weekly column for the Punch newspaper and has served on the editorial board of the Independent newspaper. Join me to welcome the lead director, Center for Social Justice, who will give us the social justice angle to budgeting and who we budget for. Barrister Eze Onyekere, you have the floor, sir. You have the virtual floor. Thank you very much. You can unmute yourself and speak to us.
Okay, thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for this wonderful opportunity. Let me stand on existing protocols. I hope I'm being heard.
Very well. We can hear you very well. You're heard, you are seen.
Good. Now, from the topic, clearly, we all agree that something is very fundamentally wrong with the national economy. I mean, if you look at the growth figures of less than 1% in the last quarter, unemployment rate in excess of 33%, inflation rate in excess of 17%, a national currency that is losing value by the day, and the dwindling foreign reserves at a time of increasing or high oil prices, as well as using 97% of our return revenue for debt service and leaving only 3% of what we actually earned to run capital recurrent expenditure. If we move from there, we will see that there is what I consider to be an inextricable link between political governance and economic governance. And unfortunately, political governance trumps economic governance issues. So if you get your political governance wrong, you are likely to find it reflect in a very, very negative way in your economic outcomes. And that's exactly why Nigeria is where we find ourselves today. Now, moving from there, we have been behaving as if to say there are no laws, no norms, no need to work within some level of evidence as a basis for budgeting. I will start by saying that our greatest challenge is that there is something called the plan, policy, budget continuum. Plans and policies must find resonance and reflect in the budget for the budget to put resources together for their implementation. Once you make your plans and policies and keep them in one jacket, and by the time you are making your budget, you look the other way, and there's that disconnect. And there's that disconnect between your budget plans and policies. Then we will continue to have the kind of challenge we have today. The economic outcomes from the budget will definitely be not exactly what we have actually put down in our policies for it to reflect. Now, even looking at the policies themselves, raw policy options, once you have them and you want to push them through the resource envelope of the budget, will definitely give you very wrong outcomes. Today, for instance, in Nigeria, we've decided to be subsidizing consumption of fuel, of petroleum. And of course, we don't have functional refineries. We create jobs abroad, put pressure on Naira, and do all kinds of things, all in the name of protecting the so-called poor Nigerians. When we can, if assuming we must do subsidy, when we can use that subsidy regime to create jobs and capacitate our economy. And by insisting on this fuel subsidy stuff, we are also creating massive fraud. I tell you what, before this administration came on board in 2015, the NNPC was projecting that we were doing 35 million liters of subsidy, 35 million liters for petroleum every day in terms of subsidy. Now, fast forward 2021, 2 recessions, more factory closures, more Nigerians unemployed. We are now, NNPC is now claiming subsidy on 60 million, 55, 60 million liters. And in one of those days or weeks, they even claim subsidy on 101 million liters of petroleum a day. What the whole of West Africa cannot even consume. What does that amount to? Even at 35 million liters around 2015, early 2015, some of us were convinced that the figures were padded for corruption. Now to begin to claim 60 million liters at this time, there is nothing, absolutely nothing backed by evidence to show that it is not a question of corruption. So it is the policy choices we have made that has also led us to this pass. We have a situation that we've never witnessed before. An NPC refusing to fund the federal budget or the federation account for the trade tiers for a month or two, all with stories that continue ad infinitum. Okay? And if you look at these things, that means the wrong policy choices we've made has denied us of much needed revenue with which we need to fund the budget. Now, also the issue of policy choices on resource mobilization. Who says that the only option available to us is to borrow? So that we can be borrowing and almost committing all our return revenue to debt service. That's not true. The Fiscal Responsibility Act in Section 42 made it very clear that 90 days within the coming into force of that act, which came into force in July 2007, that the president, on the advice of the finance minister, was supposed to place debt limitation for the 3 tiers of government because debt is on the exclusive legislative list for the approval of the National Assembly. Between 2007 and 2021, I don't know whether 90 days have passed. My organization went to court against the Minister of Finance and the Attorney General and the National Assembly, and Kolawole J said, go ahead and set that debt ceiling. Up till today, nobody has set that debt ceiling. Nobody has appealed that judgment. Our attempts to cite the Honorable Attorney General for contempt, judges have been so afraid to put down after we filed for 48 and 49 to commit this gentleman to prison for violating the laws of the land. Suma is in jail for contempt of court, not even for the offense he's committing, because there is law and order in South Africa. Nigeria is a jungle. Nobody, since 2018, that judgment was gotten. No appeal, no compliance, no judge has summoned the courage to set down this matter for it to be a proper contempt proceeding. Now, if you move on from there, you come to the issue that was raised about consultations. The Honorable Director General of the Budget Office talks about consultations. The law is clear that under the MTF you need consultation, but there has never been consultations. What they have is just to run around to fulfill all righteousness. You call people for a consultation meeting on such an issue as fiscal policy of the federal government. You don't give anybody the opportunity to read what you have prepared in advance for them to study to come and make an input. You give them 2 days notice, no documentation. You call up a meeting, put up slides for us to watch, and in 1 hour you've concluded. In the next 1 hour, the MTF that you purportedly consulted us upon is on the website of the budget office. That's not consultation. There should have been consultation with the private sector, with professional groups, with people who are knowledgeable. I'm just saying you should go and consult the people maybe in the villages. Maybe the legislators can do that at their town hall meetings. So that input, that opportunity for people to make that input is lost and it is not there. So at the end of the day, what you have is the knowledge of a few people in the corridors of power. Unfortunately, the way the economy is structured today, that knowledge of that few people is not in a position to lead us out of the challenges we are currently facing. Now, if you move from there, I am agreeable with a lot of things he said about the legislature and how the budget has been mismanaged. Now, we have a budget office manned by technical experts. The minimum we expected the legislature to do is to have a legislative budget office, like it happens in the US. so that there wouldn't be that capacity asymmetry between what you have in the budget office and legislators who are hiring maybe consultants on an ad hoc basis, consultants of doubtful quality, with utmost respect. There is no running around the bush. The Constitution creates the shadows for the different tiers of government to invest in, to take responsibility for. You cannot be building, federal government cannot be building a primary health center in my village when primary health care is the duty of the local governments, or at best, state governments will supervise them. Now, if you finish building the structure, as our studies have shown, federal government invests capital because the legislators drag the federal government into it. Who will post the nurses? Who will post the midwives? Who will pay the salary? So in many cases, federal government finished building a primary healthcare center. But because the government of the state or the local government was not carried along, the whole place is overtaken by weeds, reptiles. So you've committed billions, supposedly for primary healthcare, but it is not functional. It is not producing the desired results. I dare say as a lawyer that the federal government's investment in matters outside of the legislative competence of the National Assembly is ultra-virus the powers of the National Assembly, is unconstitutional, is null and void, but what they're doing is simply that they're pushing their way through simply because they believe they have the powers, and the executive have not summoned up the courage to even take them to the Supreme Court so that once and for all, we can have a definitive interpretation of exactly where the powers of the National Assembly stop and where that of the executive, begins. Now, in terms of revenue, part of the challenges we have is that we have refused to plug the leaking pipes of corruption. The Auditor General for the Federation every year reports the same kind of financial felonies, misdemeanors about people sitting on government revenue. Auditor General is not a political office. You prepare your accounts. He comes in, reviews what you've done, and raises queries to say, can you please explain why it did not conform to the law or the policies in place or the financial regulations? It is your inability to explain properly or adequately that allows him to upscale it maybe to the Public Accounts Committee. So many agencies and their leaderships have been, indicted for holding down trillions of naira. And nobody follows up on it. It's expected that the president, the head of service, the secretary to the government of the Federation, ICPC, EFCC are supposed to follow up on these issues. Year after year, they report on this thing. And it's just like nothing happens. And people move on. Now, coming to tax revenue, that has been a requirement of the Fiscal Responsibility Act. But like he pointed out, the tax revenue, the tax expenditure is now running neck to neck with exactly the actual revenue that the federal government takes in. So one expects that these laws should be reviewed and these policies should be reviewed so that at the end of the day, we have a situation where we will take more of the revenue rather than simply leaving it to those we are trying to incentivize, because even the incentives have not produced the results. Now, in conclusion, I think that if we want to budget for economic growth and inclusion, including all the Nigerian people, because the question is budgeting for who? For today, the budget is for a few people on the corridors of power and their friends and cronies. It's not touching the lives of Nigerians. So we must reach out for inclusion, for consultations, to carry everybody along, and then work based on evidence. There should be evidence in terms of, don't allow deviations to be 30 or 40%. It is 5%, 10%, we can understand, but let us make an evidence-based budget, plug the leaking pipes of corruption, and carry everybody along. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much, Mr. Onyekere. We sincerely appreciate you. You have raised some fundamental issues. And I hope that when we have the opportunity for response to comments, that we'll be able to look at it. The budget, the DG budget, will come back to it. Now, we have to come to a new dimension as part of efforts to help to groom a successor generation. The Nigerian Prize for Leadership introduced the Ambassadors Leadership Program. We had the first set of them last year, They were kept for 1 month and tutored and groomed through the process of nation building. And we have organized them into clusters for every of the programs we are going to have on this beat. And for the July cluster, we have Ambassador John Aji, who is leading the cluster. And I believe that some of his colleagues are on the platform to be with him. John completed his law degree in 2018 and proceeded to the Nigerian Law School for his BL. He's currently a member of the Nigerian Bar Association, member of the Nigerian Young Lawyers Forum, member NBA Abuja Branch Unity Bar. He's also a member of the International Organization of Management Professionals. He's an associate member of the Nigerian Institute of Entrepreneurs. Sorry, we had a temporary challenge with the network, but I think we are back now. So John is currently pursuing a career in corporate law, and he's doing his best to make sure that he does well at it. Those who are with him, supporting him, part of the process of coming on this platform include Ambassador Ashafa Musa Hassan, Ambassador Grace Mfong Isong, Ambassador Dr. Vincent Chidera, Ambassador Chidima Arua, Ambassador Nebila Sani Usman, Ambassador Akinola Joseph, Ambassador Osanye Clay Aneni, Ambassador Bello Muth, Ambassador David Alpha Dandaura, and Ambassador Husseinat Hassan. It is now my pleasure to welcome Ambassador John Aji to speak on behalf of his cluster. Ambassador John Aji, you have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ike. Good evening, everybody. I don't know if I'm audible enough. Can you all hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay.
We can hear you.
Thank you so much to the Nigerian Prize for Leadership for having me on this platform with these noble Nigerians. I would also like to say a very big thank you to the members of my group, the July Cluster, for having me represent them. I'm going to be quickly speaking on the topic, reworking the economy from process to funding, budgeting for whom, and that's where I'm going to be particularly fixed on. I'm going to be talking on budgeting for whom because it seems we've been making budgets, we've been budgeting for decades now, but the question is, do the dividends get to the people at the bottom? So that's what I'm going to be focused on this evening. To my mind, just like the distinguished Senator Ibrahim Ida has said, he alluded to one of which to prepare a budget. I also think that Section 14, subsection 2, paragraph B also alludes to budget when it says primary purpose of government. So by budgeting, we seek to prepare, we seek to promote the welfare and to secure the people. So I've highlighted some of the challenges here, and I'm going to be looking at how the 2021 budget, provides for these things. And I have one of them, insecurity. I'm also going to look at unemployment. I'm also going to look at food inflation. I'm also going to look at illiteracy and poverty. So let's quickly go through insecurity. Defense occupies the #1 spot in the budget, and rightly so. Banditry, Fulani herdsmen onslaught on farmers across the Middle Belt, kidnapping, Boko Haram terrorist activities, and attacks by unknown gunmen, or gunmen in quote, are some examples of the insecurity that is currently bedeviling Nigeria. About 840 billion naira has been budgeted for defense in the 2021 budget. This is July. We are almost at the end of the second quarter, so we should be tracking the implementation. How have we been able to keep the perpetrators of this act at bay? Do we still have these terror acts going on? How many military hardware have we been able to purchase? Just last night, I was reading in the news that the US Senate blocked the sale of military equipment to the tune of over $800 million to Nigeria because of the poor human rights record of the government. So these things play out as well. So even if you have budgeted to have these things tackled, there are certain things that have to be in place for you to achieve your aim at the end of the day. The other question is, are roads still safe? Are school children still getting kidnapped or not? Are we gathering enough intelligence on the perpetrators of this act? Are we bringing them to book? So these are the questions that come to mind when you look at the figures appropriated for defense. We can't just be putting this money out there. We need to also track the implementation. I'm also going to talk about unemployment. Youth unemployment in Nigeria today stands at an alarming 42.5. That's approximately 43%. In other words, in every 100 youths, there's a likelihood that 43 or more are unemployed. We are not even talking about underemployment. This does not even include underemployment, like I said. According to a recent report by the World Bank, Nigeria is currently going through its worst unemployment crisis in history. 400 earmarked by the federal government for special intervention programs and youth empowerment. So the question is, will that be enough to tackle this mass unemployment and underemployment that we currently that we are experiencing in Nigeria? We need to create actual jobs. In my opinion, empowerment schemes are good, but they do not really create long-term job security. So we should look at creating actual jobs and empowering people to come up with business ideas, because not everybody is going to come out to partake in some of this. We also, currently, the government has banned cryptocurrency, Twitter. Cryptocurrency is a major achievement, in a major breakthrough in blockchain technology. So when you by banning cryptocurrency, you've empowered a lot of youth and you've cut down jobs. In other words, you are adding to the list of unemployed youths by banning cryptocurrency. Just a few weeks ago, Twitter was banned as well. People were actually making a living from Twitter. We have people doing PR, we have people selling on Twitter. So that means these people have been added to the list of unemployed youth. So if these figures are going to be reviewed, we are going to have more than 43% of unemployed youth. So government needs to look at that as well. So because, in my opinion, if you regulate these things, you don't have to borrow. You can levy, you can tax people doing crypto, you can tax people carrying on business on Twitter. So you do not really need to go out and borrow if you actually look inwards and empower people and create jobs. We also have to pay attention to our young professionals. Lawyers, doctors, engineers are leaving Nigeria in search of greener pasture. So we have to create jobs for them. Food inflation currently stands at 22.72%. That's about 23%. This means that food prices have doubled or quadrupled in recent times. The Ministry of Agriculture and Rural Development got about 211 billion naira in the 2021 budget. So we want to see results. An ordinary Nigerian is not interested about the figures that are put out in the budget. They are not interested about the GDP. They want to survive. So the question is, how much are we buying rice? How much does a bag of rice cost today? How much does a bag of garri cost today? Rice, these are the problems. These are the issues for a common man. For the common man who doesn't understand all these terminologies, they want to see things work and they can't eat. So we need to look at that, because hardship increases criminal propensity. When someone doesn't eat, he might begin to consider crime. It's not an excuse, but it's a factor, and it's here with us. Illiteracy. Currently, there are about 30 million out of school children in Nigeria. This doesn't speak well for the future of the country. About 266.22 billion has been allocated to the Ministry of Education. So we need to see efforts in place to cutting these numbers and getting these children back to the classes. We also have to provide the incentive for teachers to motivate them. We also need to begin to liaise with lecturers and teachers so that we can try to avoid strike actions, because when students stay at home for a long time, they might, consider crime. We also need to provide scholarships for the less privileged, as well as develop a framework for student loan in tertiary institutions. Then we as a group have also identified potential areas of waste in the 2021 budget, and that's something I would like to quickly talk about. For example, security votes. About 24.4 billion naira has been allocated across 12 ministries, departments, and agencies as security votes. Of this, about 93 of the NDAs already have allocations for security charges. So that's like a duplicity. So we need to be looking at this. We can save money, we can cut costs without actually. Number two, motor vehicle. About 18.
Hello, Ambassador John, please unmute yourself. We can't hear you again. Unmute yourself.
Oh, sorry, can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear you. While trying to unmute the other person, you got unmuted, or you got muted. So please go ahead, we can hear you now.
So, like I was trying to point out potential areas of waste in the 2021 budget. I talked about security votes. I said about 24.4 billion naira has been allocated across 12 MDAs as security votes. Of these, 93 of the MDAs already have allocations for security charges. So that's more like a duplication. We also have motor vehicle. About 18.9 billion is allocated for the purchase of motor vehicles across different ministries, departments, and agencies of government. So the question is, what happened to the vehicles purchased in the 2020 budget and previous budgets? We always have to purchase motor vehicles for our MDAs every year. We have to look at these issues. Another one is unspecified projects. About 153.4 billion has been allocated for operation cost of unspecified capital projects across 9 agencies. We must ensure transparency in budgeting. The projects should be specified. There's no such thing as unspecified capital project. They are budgeting for over 200 million people, so it should be as transparent as possible. We have the National Assembly taking up about 128 billion naira for innovation and expansion. That is humongous. We need to cut these kinds of costs and channel these funds into areas of our economy that require urgent attention. Anniversaries and celebrations, about 12.44 billion have been allocated to 22 MDAs. What are they celebrating? This about 12.44 billion is going to go. We did a calculation and we found that about 8 billion can be channeled towards the renovation of over 100 primary healthcare centers in different local governments. So we should be cutting costs. We're in a pandemic. International travels, about 17.55 billion will be spent by government officials on international travels, trainings, and other costs. These kinds of spending should be reviewed in subsequent budgets. We cannot afford wastage at this time. So, in conclusion, we are not oblivious of the factors that could militate against the realization of these objectives, but we need to see the efforts of government in mitigating the harsh effects of these challenges that are currently bedeviling our country. Government is doing well in some areas, transportation, swift response to COVID-19 pandemic and all that, but we want more efforts, especially in terms of securing lives and property. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Their teacher is here clapping for them. Thank you, Prof. Well, it looks like we have the answers in the room. Thank you so much. We've had the people. I think we have cut across all the sectors. Now we shall go to the participants. Please, if you want to make comments, you can raise up your hand and then we can take your comment. You have only 2 minutes to speak, only 2 minutes, because we have to come back to the guests to hear from them. Before now, we had the Prosper's hand up, but we had to bring it down because it wasn't time. Okay, he has raised it again. Then we had Michelle, and now Dr. Emeka Oking was added. Ambassador Ibrahim Ida also has raised up his hand. So we're going to take it in that series. We take Prosper, we take Ibrahim, and we take Dr. Okembu. Thank you very much. So, Prosper, you have the floor. Is Ezekiel's hand still up? Please, if you still want to speak, indicate by raising up your hand, and then we'll take it from there. Prosper, you have the floor. 2 minutes, please.
Thank you very much. Like you said, my name is Soere Parledun Prosper. I'm participating from Port Harcourt, and I'm so privileged to be among those that are part of Nigeria Prize for Leadership. And I want to also say that I'm very active with this program is because my desire is to see or to have a better Nigeria for the next generation. So come to today's topic, talking about budgeting. I think if I have to answer the question of that budgeting, from what has been discussed so far, I discovered that the Nigeria budget is not for me at all. It's not for me. Because from the last speaker talking about the security vote and what have you see that none of those things cut across to me. As a student, I'm struggling to go to school. Sponsoring myself is not easy at all. Then you see that the budget we have, give privileges to those who carry gun. That aside, so and also I think that there are, the people are not carried along, like we said, and there's massive ignorance. And I also on the part of our government, I also perceive that our government are not sincere at all with us. Our government are not sincere with us. Thank you very much.
Mr. Ezekiel Usochukwu, you have the floor, please. 2 minutes. Unmute yourself and then talk to us for 2 minutes.
Are you hearing me?
Yes, we can hear you. Please go ahead.
Okay, my question goes to Ogaben Akabueze. He noted that Nigeria does not have a national budget. What we have is the budget of the federal government of Nigeria. So I wanted him actually to expatiate further on this. Because if we don't have a national budget and we have the budget of the federal government of Nigeria, what is the budget for? Does it really intend to cater for the whole nation? That is my number one question. Then my number two question is the issue of poor revenue. He noted he talked about poor remittance from government agencies. And this poor remittance has not been addressed. And I see that what we allow in some government agencies, we cannot permit it in our own personal enterprises. Why are these not addressed by the federal government? Thank you.
So who is your second question to?
To the same Ogaben Akabueze.
Okay. Okay, thank you very much. Ibrahim, Ida, you have the floor. The ambassador, not the big one.
Thank you very much, sir. Junior, sir.
Okay.
Good evening, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. My comment is I just want to say that please, where this is a global platform and Nigeria is our country, no matter how bad it is. So please, we should really be careful of the words we choose to use when addressing our country or the state of the nation. We should not make incendiary comments. We should not make comments that appeal to tribal and ethnic or racial sentiments. And that's just all I wanted to say. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. You're a good ambassador of the nation through NPL. Thank you very, very much. Dr. Emeko Kim, you have the floor, sir.
Thank you very much. I'm going to be staying with
our teacher at the last edition, so we are glad you're with us this evening. Thank you.
Thank you. It was a day for me. I want to stay with some very critical issues, and I want a correlation. Now, first we have that is national, and they collect the money into this regulation account that is now being split by both the nationals. Now, what effort is government making from that perspective where it belongs to, in now aligning budgets of these nationals and sub-nationals for us to be able, this national budget that is most. That is one. Two, Gabriel also mentioned that South Africa was generating a lot of this from his agricultural sector. I need to say about 13% of South Africa's and are able to, right, they have been able to exceed, their national projections by at least 1 million to 2 million of goods. And that is why you go to every ShopRite and you have, both perishable goods coming from South Africa. 15% of the plant arable. Now, 6 million hectares of land that is, we have probably the most youthful population in the whole of Africa. It also gives to us, which is 65%. That is something million, Nigerians. Okay, the question, what efforts are we making at the level of planning, at the level to be able to also now, put this 86 million metric ton hectares of land into use by introducing technology, which we're doing. And probably on a last note now, is also staying with the National Planning Commission. What is the relationship between the National Planning Commission, at the national, how do you people now relate with the budgetary systems at the subnationals? So that when you now have this input 8% and that person getting 2%, it doesn't now dwindle into these very, heartbreaking figures of 8% as against smaller than one state of Nigeria at 14%, to GDP. Thank you. It was an honor listening to you.
Is from Mr. Ijogi, Adakole Ijogi. You have 2 minutes. Unmute yourself and then speak to us, please.
Yes, good evening.
Good evening. The time is running.
Yes, I would like to thank Mr. Ben Akakweze for his very intellectual contribution to this conversation. And I want to agree with him that most of my figures were based on federal figures. But I want to also add that, yes, while those figures were based on federal government figures, not excluding state and local government figures, that in South Africa and especially in Brazil, they have what they call the national budget. But after that being said, I also want to join my question to him. It's a question actually, just like Dr. Okengu has, Emeka Okengu has mentioned, is in the budget office, how are we aligning what the federal government is doing with regards to policy, with regards to planning with subnationals? Is there a way we can tie these development processes from the national to state and to the local government so that we can engender some form of development? That is my question to the very distinguished intellectual and astute Mr. Ben Akakweze. And kindly allow me to use this opportunity to say hello to my father, Senator Ibrahim Ida, and also to Professor Anya. I did have the opportunity because I was looking at 5 minutes. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. The last on this will be Ambassador Ike Onoma. Thereafter, we'll take a few things and then we'll go back to the speakers. So Ambassador Ike, you have the floor. 2 minutes.
Thank you very much. Good evening, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. I hope my voice I can hear.
Hello?
Hello?
Network seems to be glitching, but you can go ahead. Let's see if it's better.
This is good.
Okay, all right. Good evening, everybody. So I have a question, and it's in the bid to understand the workflow process. So we understand that based on what the DG has informed us, that the budget, the national budget, or what we call the national budget, is basically the budget of the federal government. Now, so I'd just like to ask if the I'm just trying to see if I would ask rather if there's a link between the budget office, the national budget office as we know it, with the respective states, so that if we know oftentimes the discussion on the budget has always been around the federal budget, but there is also the need to track what happens in the states with respect to projects, and also is there a working link between the states, the states, those who manage the budget at the state level and the national level. Most importantly, the fact that at the national level, or based on the paper or the presentation of Mr. Ben, he called out the Strategic Revenue Growth Initiative. Permit me if I didn't get out, if I'm not very clear on that, but I think that's a structure, the pillars to ensure growth. So if this structure is being put in place on the national level, how does it cascade down to the sub-national level, the state level, and the local level? So we can have a way to track not just the federal, because sometimes some of the problems which we see in the nation, there are some states, or there are more grassroots areas of approach which we don't necessarily see. So I'd like to know if there's that working link. Thank you very much.
Thank you very, very much for our contributors who have done very well. We should be returning to the panelists for responses. But before then, we want to sincerely appreciate some of our partners who are on the platform. The Nigerian Television Authority has been excellent in supporting the National Leadership Dialogue Series in particular, and then the Nigerian Prize for Leadership in general. We want to appreciate the AIT, want to appreciate the Arise News, Channels Television, Abuja Broadcasting Corporation, Trade Union Congress, Historical Society of Nigeria, Guild of Editors, Media Trust, Broadcasting Organizations of Nigeria, Committee of Vice Chancellors of Nigerian Universities, and so on. But most importantly, we want to appreciate the Institute for National Transformation, the Institute for National Transformation. They have been so wonderful, and they have a program that is coming up. They are partnering with us, and we share platforms. So for those of us that still have young ones who are teenagers, either children or grandchildren, please know that the Institute for National Transformation is having a summer leadership program. They do this to help to raise a replacement generation from young age across the country. And the theme is help our youth the truth to know. I'm sure we are familiar with that line. Help our youth the truth to know. That's the second stanza, part of the second stanza of our national anthem. That's a prayer that we actually prayed this afternoon. So it starts from Saturday 21st to Sunday 22nd August, and it is free, very free. Take advantage of this to begin early to nurture our young people. Okay? At this point, I would like to get back to our guests, and I would like to plead with all of us that we are now wrapped up, and we have to cover the time that we didn't adhere to strictly, because when they were speaking, they were indeed communicating, and we didn't want to stop any of them. But at this time now, because we have to be a bit stricter so that we can close on time without overshooting our runway, as the case may be. So I will start in the order of the young man who spoke last. That's the way we normally do it. The last becomes the first, and then the first becomes the last, so that the first can bring everything together and then summarize. So we start from the son, and then we end with the father. So, John, actually, you have the floor to conclude your remark, and you have 5 minutes. You don't have to do this if you don't have enough words to speak. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you once more, everybody. In close, I'd like to say that from all that yes, efforts are being still a lot more to do. And while talking earlier, because of time constraints, I couldn't submit my. I'm going to do that quickly. So, as a group, with about recommendations that we are urging the government to look into making budgets. One, we have to close the bottlenecks that prevent the dividends. We are not oblivious of the practices that hinder of the budget makers from getting down to those at the bottom. So subsequently, we want the bottlenecks to be. We need to curb corruption by strengthening our anti-graft agencies. We know that corruption is in the country. We've had instances where lawmakers collude with the NLDS and get their own share. We know these things. We are Nigerians. So we people to be scapegoated so that others can learn from. So we need to empower our graft agencies to curb corruption, especially as it involves budget. We need to look inwards to create wealth, so we do not always have to go borrowing. Our capacity, we do not have the capacity to generate all the funds needed to implement our budget internally. Cut the cost. Like I said, I made some recommendations earlier while speaking. When you create jobs, empower people, you not always have to ban, because in my let's take the issue of the cryptocurrency government. It banned cryptocurrency because some youth use the platform to. We have people wiring from funds through the commercial bank. Okay, why commercial banks anyways? Because we have people transferring illegally acquired funds through the commercial, which to me is like blowing off your teeth because you have stock productive. So we need to look in what we need to source for ways of creating funds within, because it hurts us in the long run. Then finally, we also have to look for a way to address youth. 43% youth unemployment. Crime is inevitable. If you cannot guarantee the future of your youth, sleep. It is not an excuse for crime, but it is a factor. If you look are not gainfully employed, crime is inevitable. Thank you. And once more, thank you.
Thank you very, very much. Thank you. And now we come to Barrister Eze Onyekere.
Well, thank you for the opportunity once more. In my wrapping up, I will say that we have to seriously tackle the political challenges facing Nigeria, particularly issues around insecurity, and of course, unite the country behind a common purpose, because today, part of the challenge to the economy is that we don't have that unity of purpose. Everybody is going his own separate way and doing things in the way he or she or the group likes. And also, it's imperative for the National Assembly and the executive to do more collaboration in the budgeting process instead of the idea of looking for who has more powers or who will override each other. The expectation is do more consultation, do more collaboration. Don't simply wait until the end of the day to say you have released some money from the executive budget so that you can insert one project in your community. Go to that ministry, if it is health or education, at the time they are preparing their medium-term sector strategies, or at the time they are preparing their proposals. Find a way of seeing whether that project in your village can fit into the proposal of the Ministry of Health, Agriculture, Education. It's better to sponsor it that way than to wait until the last minute to insert it into the federal budget, because there have been no studies or no feasibility studies, environmental impact assessment, and all kinds of things that should have preceded inserting something into the federal budget that will be done at that late hour. And finally, for the government, open up the mall, be more transparent in what you do, because part of the challenges about even raising revenue is that most Nigerians are simply not in the frame of mind to pay their taxes, because they simply believe that the available money is already being mismanaged. So why should I even give the little I have to join for the treasury to be mismanaged? So let's have more transparency, let's have more opening up, and let's have more consultation and allow more people to participate in the policy-making process. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let's have more transparency. Let's have more openness. Let's have more consultations. And the country. This is very important for me. And I think that the Nigerian Institute of Public Relations should be speaking to SNA because I know that integration is one of the issues that the NIPR is addressing today in Nigeria. Thank you so much. Now we come to the Budget Master of the Federation, Mr. Ben Akabweze. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you for very lively and I believe mutually informative session that we've had this evening. I'll try and comment on some of the issues that have been raised. I'm sure this dialogue continues. It's labeled a dialogue, and I say this. I'll put out my email address after this. I'm open for to continue the dialogue. There are issues that we're not satisfied about the answers that we get here. I think raised a number of issues, but the one about debt limitation thing. I think that there's actually a medium-term debt management strategy, which sets limitations. I know that recently, the medium-term debt management strategy raised the debt to GDP ratio from 20% that it has been held at for several years now to 40%. So but then, we can have a discussion about what kinds of fiscal rules should govern our, public borrowing. But I think to say there are no debt limitations, for instance, we still don't have any, ultimately debts are paid from revenues, like in cash, but from GDP, even though there is an expectation that there should be some correlation between your revenues and your GDP. But we see that that's not necessarily the case, depending on the structure of your GDP. And so perhaps, ratios like debt service to revenue ratios are that we should now begin to think about how to define, limits, around. In terms of public consultation, we're open to improve, but I think that the point needs to be made that public consultation on them is not an event. We hold an event which is a public, but thereafter we put up and it's labeled draft. What we post immediately after that on our website is a draft MTEF and is labeled so draft, and it remains a draft open for consultation. And even when we then send that draft to the National Assembly, the National Assembly itself will normally organize oftentimes a 2-day session to which they invite people still consulting on the MTEF before they finally, until National Assembly passes it, it remains the draft and a document for consultation. So it's not an event, it's a whole process. I do agree on the continuing need to, plug, leaking pipes of corruption. It's true. It's something that needs to happen. But I say this, and at the risk again of stepping out on a limb, because it can be misunderstood. One of the things when Lee Kuan Yew decided to seriously tackle public sector corruption in Singapore. One of the things he did was, look at public sector wages, the salaries for the public sector, and he matched them to private sector levels. Today, the reality is that if we continue to argue, and it's not an excuse for anyone, but that's just a reality of, to pay people the kinds of salaries that we pay them. So you see, take a director in the civil service who spent over 30 years in public service, and he's earning a salary of 400,000 naira a month, and he's got family and all kinds of whatever there. And this same fellow maybe superintending over a program or a project with a budget of 40 billion naira and whatever. It's a lot of temptation to be able to sing. And so, these are, real, issues. That, as I said, it doesn't excuse the corruption, but we need to really be more holistic in fighting, the corruption. There were a number of items that John Aji called out. Talked about security votes and whatever. I think that what we need to do is get those further, and we can whatever. I see the word security vote has acquired a very negative connotation in Nigeria. First of all, strictly speaking, this is something rooted in history, whatever. As Senator Ida will confirm, there's really nothing. There's nothing that the murkiness of surrounding security votes, other than security agencies that require some kind of, and that is universal. You can't, be that open about what they are doing or whatever but at some level, somebody has a view or sight over what they're actually spending. But the notion of security vote as money that somebody collects and just puts in their pocket with no accountability or when that happens, that's outright theft. There's no such thing. That's not what security votes. But I know the word security vote, that's a very negative notation. Can assure you that's not what these ones in the budget represent. And if you check there, you see that they mostly relate to security agencies. Motor vehicles, again, I just think we need to keep clarifying these things. It talks about, what happened to the vehicles bought in the past. A budget is, if you take the 2020 budget, say what happened to the motor vehicles, go back to the revised 2020 budget. When the initial 2020 budget had provision for motor vehicles, when COVID-19 hit town, we decided that motor vehicles was not a top priority. The provision for motor vehicles for agencies other than those in the health sector or critical security agencies and military agencies were deleted from their revised budget. And so such agencies in 2021 had to, provide anew for them. Just but let me move on because the real issue which many people, Mr. Dr. Okembu, Prosper, and even Mr. Ijogi and everybody seemed to be concerned about, and I'm glad that was a matter of concern, which is really the linkage between our national plans and our budget. In reality, we have a national planning commission that is supposed to plan for the nation. And in that process is required to carry the subnationals along in the planning process. And when they plan, we have a national plan, then everybody, that national plan also has responsibilities. Everybody has to take a cue from it, and their budget has to speak to their own responsibilities. I can confirm that as part of the federal government's budget process, there is a mapping from any line you have in your budget, you have to map it to, a mandate in the national plan that speaks to. Without which, we have acceptance criteria for things to get into the budget, and that's one of. However, the reality is it may not look like that in what you see, for instance. So, for instance, when the MDAs are doing their own whatever, they're not going to. They do what we call medium-term sector strategy. At the end, that medium-term sector strategy culminates in a prioritized, costed listing of all the programs and projects that they will undertake to discharge their mandate, which speaks to the national plan. However, if that budget goes, if you take the budget of a Ministry of Works, for instance, their mandate doesn't include doing village roads and doing whatever in our respective communities. So it's not going to speak to it. So if they send their budget to National Assembly and then roads in villages and whatever are introduced there, you immediately create a dislocation because it doesn't, match whatever. But however, having said that, even those roads are in the national plan. It's just that they're not there. Even those village roads are there in the national plan, even though they're not for the federal government. So at the end of the day, there's hardly anything that you find in the federal government's budget that is not traceable to the plan, the National Development Plan. Whether they represent priority, the order of priority, and should have been taken in the time they were brought into the budget is another matter. Because as I said, once the budget goes to National Assembly, they don't bother with such fine, those niceties about, plan budget, whatever linkage. And so you ask, what kind of relationship do we have with the budget process in the subnational level? Again, it's not peculiar to us, but our name, Budget Office of the Federation, our name is actually a lie. Because really, we're Budget Office of the federal government. And there are many like that, Auditor General of the Federation, Accountant General of the Federation. These are basically of the federal government, but somehow those are the things that from interim era to the Constitution we wound up with. But what have we done? We've tried to foster a relationship with them. And by the way, the Constitution, you can't mandate only the state houses of assembly, just as the National Assembly has the power to appropriate for the federal government. The state houses of assembly have power under the Constitution to appropriate for the states. So it is only them who can mandate what goes into a state's budget. The federal government cannot. The National Assembly cannot even. So their own accountability is to the state houses of assembly. But what we're doing now is we're in the process of finalizing work on what we've called a national budget portal. Okay, and what this is a portal where all the tiers of government, everybody, now we've got the federal government, we've got the 36 states and FCT coming on board. The 774 local governments is a challenge. We've been trying to lay hands on the budget of one local government. We've managed to find for, I think, the 4 local councils in the FCT, but others. So everybody will be required to upload their budgets there, and we can aggregate across lines. And these budgets are going to be based on the National Chart of Accounts and whatever, so that you can match them across the expenditure. And we're working collaboratively with the Nigerian Governors Forum on this. So when you're looking for instance, how much is Nigeria spending or allocating to education, when you go to this portal, you can see it rather than pick the federal government figure alone and begin to compare with other national numbers. But this is a work in progress that we hope we can get done sometime soon. And let me stop there.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you. I would like to read some of the comments we have on the platform. Somebody requested for more time at the early presentation of Senator Eda. Said, please, I beg for more time for Senator Eda. He's really enlightening us, most especially me as an economist. That was a comment that was made at 5:03. Tochukwu Ezoke commented when we were having challenges of technology, and then Farouk Chibuzo said budget as a moral instrument. That hit him very hard, just as it did to me also. Tochukwu says Ben Akabeze is a Nigerian chartered accountant, yes, and so on. Sekefa said they are all well recognized. Akintunde from Canada. Akintunde, we welcome you. Thank you very much. He said you are much appreciated, even with the time difference. Achazie Nwawihe Anthony, if the revenue mobilization chart for African countries shown by Ben Akabeze is reality, why then are the Nigerian legislators the highest paid in the whole wide world? Where do these meet? Or the comparison is meaningless to the federal lawmakers? Okay, can we have the slides? As slides have been shared on the chat platform, and if you don't pick it, when we are sending the highlights, we'll still share it with you. Okay, Stephen Oko said, yeah, the slides will be shared. I've just answered that. Professor Momo, we appreciate you indeed. Yes, you're right, sir. The federal government is spending a lot on constituency roles that are state and local. This is from Mrs. Sanusi, who is the Director of Communications and Public Relations at FEMA, Federal Road Maintenance Agency. Federal government budget executes close to 20,000 projects across the federation annually. That's a comment. Okay. Thank you very much. And then we have a few others. Consultations on federal medium-term fiscal framework and fiscal policy are aimed at getting inputs from stakeholders. Shouldn't stakeholders review current frameworks and policies to be able to submit informed proposals for consideration? The draft document remains work in progress, and until consultations are concluded, it is not ready. Okay, this is an input from Professor Olumide Ayodele. Okay, thank you very much, sir. Ibrahim, we have read what Ambassador Ibrahim said. Farouk, thank you, distinguished experts, for the presentation. Nigerian economic planners should really think out of the box because Nigeria is going through worst economic crisis in history. It's important also to increase efforts towards fighting corruption in all institutions, at least to the barest minimum, because this is one huge internal enemy against progress. The last speaker spoke eloquently and awesomely. Kudos to the organizers and all the speakers. Glad to be part of this. This is from Agnes Abaji. Okay. Budgeting for whom? Are we focusing only on the impact of the FGN budget? What are the CSOs and non-state actors doing to track budget implementation of the various state and local government? Direct impact starts grassroots. We must. All right, sir, noted.
Yes, okay.
Noted. Thank you very much. Okay. And then finally, Senator Eda would like to thank Mrs. Dorothy Ufot, Senior Advocate of Nigeria, who is the current 2020 Arbitrator of the Year for Africa. So people from Britain, Nwamara from Britain, Professor Momo, Mrs. Ngozi Akubeze is also with us here. You know where she's coming from. Alhaja Tijani, Celestine Achi of Digital PR, one of our partners. We thank all of you. It's now my pleasure to yield the floor for Senator Ibrahim Ida for his concluding remarks. Thereafter, we are going to read the highlights. We are going to read the highlights of the session, and then we bring it to a close. Senator Ida, you have the floor for your brief conclusion, sir. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Before I conclude, please, I want to really respond to some issues raised by my friend Ben and others. First of all, I agree that there's need for there to be ascribed a percentage or a ratio between recurrent and capital. But I think the move should be honestly from the executive. If there is to be a law, let them propose it. I'm sure it will be considered. Now, secondly, then the issue of the interpretation of powers. I beg to disagree. I was there during the Malan Umaru presidency, during the move. It was not withdrawn because the two parties or the two chambers or the two sides were for the same. Simply withdrawn because the executive had been informed, briefed, and advised that as far as the Constitution is concerned, what the National Assembly was doing was in tandem with what the law is. And so it was withdrawn because it's a way of saving face, not because the National Assembly and the executive were bound were from the same party. Now, on the issue of constitution, the projects, I think Ben knows that, look, nothing is touched from the budget. Whatever the budget, the president presents the budget, is passed. All these constitutional projects usually emanate from funds that were realized either through the repricing of the exchange rate, or sometimes some funds that the executive had maybe overlooked. So the presentation, the cracks of the budget project presented by the president are left intact or virtually intact. So I believe, and sometimes it is actually the MDAs that encourage it, because rather than allowing the National Assembly to do itself, most of the heads of these NDAs, they go to the National Assembly through the back and then even suggest to them projects that they should ask for in the constituency projects. So I will suggest that Ben really goes back and seek, or rather, prevail on his colleagues in the executive to really not engage in that. Now, the issue, look, we are operating a presidential system. Once you have a presidential system, you are bound to have this type of conflict between the executive and the assembly, the parliament. Look at what's happening in America. I mean, the president will bring his budget and present it. It will be rejected outrightly based on the idiosyncrasies of the members of parliament. They will now insist that until their own interests are catered for, they will not accept it. It is happening right now. The budget he has presented for the infrastructure has been so pruned down, and sometimes the objection comes from his own party members. So I believe that it is something that over time we'll get to understand. Now, then the question of federation budget. Look, the budget is a national budget. Even if not, is a national budget, at least to the extent of the policy thrust there. The policies cover the whole nation. If you have some fiscal policies, duty, taxes, a man in Lagos will pay as much, a company in Lagos will pay as much company tax as the one in Sokoto or Kano. So to that extent it is. And if you talk of monetary policies don't cover only states. They cover the whole nation. And when we talk of covering the field, the lawyers here will know. whatever comes from the federal government really covers the whole nation. So if you call it national, you are not giving it a wrong name, maybe an interpretation. And when you call him or the accountant general of the federation, it's not a misnomer. It is simply, maybe in terms of semantics, you may have something to do with it. But the fact remains that the accountant general covers the whole nation, whereas a state accountant general covers only the confines of the state. So calling him a federal or a DNC does not in any way change from the fact that he's doing the same thing that the accountant general was doing, only on a much wider scope. And then the next is the connection between a national plan and a budget. You see, a budget is supposed to be a subset of a national plan. It means a means of translating a national plan to the extent of a particular year. So really, you find out the problem we have is that we do not have a concrete national plan that is drawn up on the basis of the reality of the situation, and that could be translated on yearly basis with the national budgets. Virtually, you find that sometimes the two may even be mutually exclusive, in the sense that the budget is going one way, while the national plan is going another way. Now, finally, let me say this. You see, Nigeria will suffer from ignoring the past and really not implementing policies that are bound to raise the economy. I will quote you. In 1996 to 1997, we have the Vision 2010 process. Ben was a member, was an active participant at that time. The chairman here was even the deputy chairman of that process. And what did the vision report say? I will read a portion of it. Now, they said is that the observation was that at that time, after about a decade of depression, the economy had shown signs of recovery. And the committee was inaugurated in 1996. The growth rate at that time rose by 3.3%. And after failing to less than 2%, inflation has also declined to about 30%. The balance of payment had declined significantly. However, the structure of the economy remained unchanged. The economy is still agricultural. The primary product being the crude oil instead of agriculture. Production activities are still highly dependent on imports, as imported consumer goods as a proportion of total import remain high at 30%. Oil accounts for about 95% of the nation's export earnings. Intersectoral linkages remain weak and unemployment remain high. During the budget process, that is from 1997 to 2010, it is envisaged that the GDP growth rate will average 10% per annum, and that a less than 5% rate of inflation will prevail as from the later years of the vision process. By 2010, the exchange rate of the Naira would have improved tremendously, while the Naira would have become convertible. Manufacturing would be accounting for about 24% of the GDP, while the relative contribution of oil to GDP would have declined to less than 20%. And finally, per capita income would have risen to $1,600. In summary, by 2010, Nigeria would have returned to the rank of middle-income countries. Now, that was the profile, that was the plan, but it was jettisoned. It was thrown away for political reasons. So, you see, you will find out that all the problems we're enumerating now were problems that were foreseen in the past, but ignored or totally thrown away for political reasons. I think, in final decision, I believe that, you see, in reworking the Nigerian economy, it is pertinent to take certain things into consideration. One, we have to appreciate the volatile nature of the international economy. It has we have to be mindful of the growing global economic and physical insecurity and the health challenges that has been brought about by the COVID-19. All this have a tremendous effect on our budget in terms of the growth of the resource profile and the demands, because some of these demands came in just overnight, not budgeted for, but they had to be catered for. And three, you see, let us look at the global scenario. In the past, Nigerians used to go to various places, walk, and remit funds there. But now, immigration laws occasioned by regime changes in America and Europe have made that very difficult. So that the inflow from diaspora has reduced considerably. And that is having a telling effect on the economy. And then there is also the internal insurgencies. Look at what is happening now. You can't farm. I mean, the bread basket in terms of corn and other legumes is, say, in the northwestern part of this country. But you can't farm now. Obviously, no. So really, we're eating on the reserve we have. The consequences are going to be more pronounced next year or in the following years. So really, we have to be mindful of the fact that, one, you see, there are certain social services that are very critical to not only the survival of the economy, but also for it to flourish. And security is one of it. So when people are complaining that a lot of money is put on security, they really don't reckon with the consequences of doing otherwise. In the end, sir, I would like to say this. Nigeria is a country endowed with really tremendous amount of resources, human and material. Properly harnessed, we can be able to build a country that is politically harmonious, economically just and equitable, socially tolerant, and in the end, one that will cater for the needs of every Nigerian and all Nigerians. All we have to do is to be committed, well-oriented, and to have the likes of Ben Akabwezi running the budget, because I know, I have known him for a very long time, and I know how capable he is to rise to the level. Let us hope that the others are really of the same mantle, because we are talking of corruption. Corruption is a mindset. Raising the salaries of people cannot or will not be the magic wand. And in the end, you see, you can't eat your cake and have it. We are now proposing an increase in the recurrent, because increase in salary is increase in the recurrent. But at the same time, we are also complaining that it is eating a lot of the available resources. So for us to balance that, let us raise the cake. Let us enlarge the cake. If we enlarge the cake, then we can afford to have as much recurrent expenditure as possible without doing any harm to the economy. With this, I want to thank you very much and thank all others. Ben, it's nice seeing your face. It has not aged in any way. That was how it was. I believe that one day you will give the Ike. I'll get your phone. I'll get his phone number from you and give him mine so that we can communicate. We used to be old friends before he became a big man. And
I think the participants know who is the big man here.
So I think
I wouldn't enter that debate at all.
So I thank you very much, and my colleagues and the lawyer Eze. There are some points you raised. We don't have time here, but I think we will enter into one-to-one dialogue, because there are so many things on which I agree and disagree with you. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, distinguished Sadana. It's a brilliant note. You've landed on a very, very brilliant note. We hope, and indeed, our nation will recover. Our nation will be redeemed. And this country will be one of the best in the world in every ramification. I know it, and it will be in our own lifetime that is going to happen. We are passing through the pain of life, of bedtime. We are going through a rebirth, and eventually, this new Nigeria will be born by new Nigerians, and we will have cause to rejoice. That is the mission of the Nigerian Prize for Leadership, to give birth to new Nigerians that will give birth to the new Nigeria. Professor Anya, I don't know if you have a parting shot before we take the highlights. The highlights are about ready. You want to say a word in conclusion before we read the highlights of today?
Well, can you hear me?
Sorry, sir. May I be allowed to go and pray? It's my prayer time.
Please.
Thank you.
Okay, what I'm going to say, I will say to you later. I've sent you a text. Okay. Now, this has been a wonderful outing. But I think there ought to be a sequel to this particular dialogue. Whether it was from Ibrahim Ida or from the young man who put together the informative sheet provided for this, or Ben Akabeze, for the first time, many of us had the real problems that are there lurking, but which you have ignored. And until we create a situation where these problems can be tackled, we will be going around in circle. What do I mean? For example, we need to have a common purpose, a common vision. It is that common vision that will now actuate our priorities in what we do. What you have dealt with today are the processes and procedures that will create the environment in which you can tackle the economic problems that you know. But you need to develop a roadmap to that future you see, constructed on the basis of economic modeling. That does not exist now, but you have provided a raw material on which such an undertaking can take place. So I say thank you very much. The dialogue is not over. We will continue. Thank you, and thank you, and God bless Nigeria.
Thank you, sir. Secretary, can you now share the highlights, please? While I extend appreciation to Mr. Falabi Olajuwon, who is a fellow of the Institute. He's been with us from the beginning. Dr. Kabir Hamisu Kura has been with us. Mr. Paul Olele joined us from the US and he's been with us. Alhaji Tijani Borodo has been with us. And of course, the father of the ambassadors, Professor Anibog, has been here with us at the studio, being part of this. Highlights. Can you extend so that you can see this more properly, please? Highlights of conclusions from the 4th edition of the 2nd National Leadership Dialogue Series, NLDS 002.3. The 3rd edition of the 2nd National Dialogue Series by Nigerian Prize for Leadership and partners held here soon on Thursday, July 29, 2021. Reworking the economy from process to funding, budgeting for whom. The webinar was well attended by partners and partners outside Nigeria, with Senator Ibrahim Ida, CON, Chairman NPL Finance and Funds Mobilization Committee as lead Director General Budget Office of the Federation, Barrister Eze Onyekere, Lead Director, Center for Social Justice, and Ambassador John Aji, Esquire, PRO, NPL Ambassadors 001, who represented the July NLDS cluster as panelists. The edition was formally opened and moderated. The edition was formally opened by the chairman of the NPL governing board and moderated by Dr. Iken Eliaku, the executive secretary. Arising from submissions by the chairman of NPL governing board, chairman NPL programs committee, lead speaker panelists, Mr. Adakole Ijogi, and contributors Sorry, you don't need to correct this, otherwise you are distracting me. You can do that later. Sorry. We are followed as part of measures and roadmap in reworking the economy through the implementation of laid out plans leading to growth in Nigeria and the continent by extension. The national budget is a financial statement and gives an estimate of planned revenues and expenditure for one particular year. Reworking the economy requires a decision at doubling the economic growth of the nation every year. For Nigeria, if the population growth is at 4% and GDP growth at 1.7%, there will be a gap and poverty will fill that gap. The economists must get the economy growing at a minimum of 11.5% annually. The national budget is a legal instrument, financial instrument, political instrument, social instrument, and economic instrument. Budget is a moral instrument. As such, budgeting is a moral process. Number 4, when we get the economy right, we will have a more harmonious relationship across the various aspects of government. The Ministry of Finance coordinates the budgets from other ministries and parastatals and then presents it as a bill to the National Assembly by the President at a joint session of the upper and lower house. It further goes through the first, second, and third reading and is discussed and amended as a budget. Some misconceptions in the budgeting process. A, not everything presented by the executive is accepted by the legislative house. B, there is often a pushback and realignment. C, while projects captured in a national budget are agreed upon by the legislative and the executive, the implementation is the function of the executive. D, borrowing is not bad so long as the intended funds are used appropriately and amortization plans duly executed. Item number 7, the World Bank presupposes revenue should be above 15% of GDP to drive economic growth and poverty reduction. The federal government budget executes close to 20,000 projects across the Federation annually. The budget, often referred to as the national budget, is actually the federal government's budget. The other tiers of government have their various allocations and budgets. 10. 48.5% of Nigeria's revenue is the allocation for the federal government. Revenue to GDP ratio is 8.4%. And though the target is 15%, this falls short of the African average of 20%. If Nigerian leaders can tackle social and economic crisis well, there will be no country better than Nigeria with all the resources we possess. At the end of the second quarter, we should be able to effectively track the budget funding based on the appropriate figures which were initially provided. Currently, there is no policy or mandate by law in Nigeria that the capital expenditure should constitute 60% of the budget, unlike some other nations. Hence, the current expenditure keeps skyrocketing rather than being kept at or below 40%. Taxation is the sustainable way of funding the public budget. However, tax revenue is currently low in Nigeria due to massive tax evasion and poor accountability. We will optimize revenue from existing sources through widening the tax net, plugging existing revenue leakages to reduce tax evasion, improving tax filing and payment compliance, digitalizing tax collection and administration for greater transparency, mitigation of compliance risks, and encouraging voluntary compliance. We have to get our policies right in order to have the right outcome. One focus area is the national budget. The government's wrong policy choices are critical sources of its inability to fund the budget. To budget for economic growth, we must reach out for the inclusion of all citizens for proper implementation and to ensure that we are all beneficiaries of the budget. The average Nigerian is concerned with implementation and not just figures. We should focus on how to internally create wealth because we have the capacity to do so and not just seek to borrow in order to fund the budget. All capital budgets should be specified. Terms like unspecified budgeting should cease to exist in order to ensure transparency. Number 20, there is an inextricable relationship between political and economic governance, and the neglect of any possesses a great challenge in budgeting. The need to take care of the Nigeria's microeconomies is integral for Nigeria to create wealth adequately. This is where we come to the end of the highlights of conclusions for today. We want to once more thank our panelists, beginning with Ambassador John Aji, followed by Barrister Eze Onyekere, and then Ben Akabueze, and distinguished Senator Ibrahim Eda. We also want to thank all the participants who have been with us this evening. We want to thank our distinguished father, Professor Anya O. Anya, Achazie Nwawihe Anthony, Afolabi Olajuwo, Agatha Tokpe Ajayi, Ayodeji John, Chindine Eliako, David, Dr. Emeka Okengu, Dr. Kabiru Hamisu Kura, Dr. Uzoma Emmanuel Eric Adile, Ezekiel Ozochukwu, Farouk Akolista, Pierre Baba, Grace, Ibrahim Eda, Ikechu Ikonoma, John Aji, Lukman Babatunde, Rose Ashinze, Nabila, Ngozi Akabueze, Nana, Oke Nwamara, who joined us from UK, Ohale Atubi, Olusegun Olutunde, Oluwatoyi Adeyelu, Philip Shinze, Rebecca Lawal, Sule Ebo, Sonny Samuel, Thelma Oko, Member of Governing Council, NIPR, Tochukwu Ezeoke, Tolu Akimayowa, Tusi Okafor, Tokpe, Uman Friday, and all the others who logged in with their instruments. We want to thank all of you. We look forward to meeting you again on the 29th of August, when we will have yet another robust engagement. Thank you so much. It has been wonderful being with you this evening, and may God bless all of you. Thank you, and God bless. If you need a copy of the highlights, please, as usual, just send a text message to us or send an email, secretariat@npl.ng. Thank you very much. God bless you. Good night.